You're listening to the official podcast of INCOSE, the premier international network dedicated to the advancement of systems engineering. I'm your host, Samantha Bernal, and this is the podcast where we have candid conversations with the systems engineers of the future. First, let's take a moment to thank the partners who made this show possible. Then, we'll get to the candid conversations with our featured guests.
Are you working in complex systems, feeling the pressure of traceability? The Weber State MBSC certificate is built for you. This graduate level certificate is traceable to real career competencies, career success, longevity, and portability. This MBSC certificate is designed for working professionals, 100% online anytime. So check us out today at weber.edu/MSSE.
Welcome to the INCOSE Podcast, where we have candid conversations with the systems engineers of the future. Today, we have the distinct honor of speaking with Michael D. Watson, President of INCOSE, and a widely respected leader in the systems engineering community. Mike, welcome to the show, and congratulations on your role as President of INCOSE. We are thrilled to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Samantha. It's great to be here.
I just want to start off with something really simple. What does a typical day for the INCOSE President look like?
So, I do have a full-time job. And so I spend a lot of my day working on things for Leidos. But then I spend a few hours a day working on various INCOSE projects and looking at things for the board of directors, looking at presentations that I'm making at different events, which I enjoy doing. I really enjoy kind of getting out and talking about INCOSE, talking about systems engineering and advancing of systems engineering and the fast pace that we are advancing compared to other engineering disciplines over the history of science.
And I want to go back to the very beginning of your systems engineering journey at the University of Kentucky and the University of Alabama in Huntsville. How did it kind of shape your career within systems engineering?
Well, that's a good question. At the University of Kentucky, all my degrees are electrical engineering. And at the University of Kentucky, I initially wanted to do aerospace, but they didn't have aerospace. So coming out of college, I went to electrical. There was a time when computers were quickly coming out. The personal computers had just kind of hit the ground in the last 2 or 3 years, and so it was an exciting time to look at computer technologies. And so that's what I did. To the Air Force, did a little bit of pilot training, and then went to NASA. When I got to NASA, I really jumped into systems engineering. I had the chance to be a systems engineer on the simulation computer system, which was the computer system for the Space Station Payload Training Complex that was eventually incorporated into the Space Station Training Facility. Having that opportunity, what I discovered is I have a natural inclination to look at the system as a whole rather than focus on any of the specific components. And so that opened up the opportunity for me to actually be the lead systems engineer for the Payload Training Complex as that project progressed, and then to become a further lead systems engineer on the Payload Data Services system and define that system, which is now part of Space Station, and it's where all the KU band telemetry data comes through. So I learned early that I really enjoyed looking at the system as a whole. Now I can go back and look at when I was in school, and space topics were always of interest to me. I think I read Wernher von Braun's biography in the 6th grade. Actually remember when they came on the news that he had passed away. I remember that. But I also remember sitting and drawing spaceships, and I didn't draw the components. I drew the whole thing. I want to see how the whole system fit together, how everything worked. And so I've always had that inclination to do that. So that got me started at NASA. I did my master's and my PhD at the University of Alabama in Huntsville in optics. And I chose optics because, I thought I need to do better with electromagnetics, and I really am interested in laser technology, which in the 90s was a big emerging thing. Fiber optics were coming out. There's a lot of emphasis on that. I read an article somewhere about a professor at UAH working on laser technology, and he ended up being my advisor. And so I went through and got my master's and PhD. But the one thing about optical systems is you actually have to look at them as a system as a whole, because everything affects the optical image. Thermal, mechanical, vibration, pointing errors, the whole thing, everything affects the optical system. So it's very much a not only understanding the optical physics, but also understanding how it comes together as a whole. So it really kind of fueled that whole systems bent that I have to look at how the system fully integrates and functions. So that really got me, that's probably halfway through my career at that point. But I really, really enjoyed that, and just looking at how systems work.
So you did spend over 30 years at NASA, and you also worked on defining vehicle management system capabilities for human missions to Mars. What unique systems engineering considerations come with long-duration human spaceflight?
That's a great question. And that segues very well with what I was just talking about with my degree progression, because when I got my PhD, about 9 months actually before I completed my dissertation and did my defense, I was asked to lead the Marshall Space Flight Center Integrated System Health Management and Sensors branch. And so I was asked to start that, kind of found that branch and start it based on some concepts I've been working over the last couple of years, looking at how do we manage spacecraft as a whole. I ended up leading a study on avionics systems for the transport of humans to Mars. And we spent a lot of time looking at how do we manage the system as a whole, and had some great members of the team that supported that. And we came up with a really good solution, one I think that still applies today, and kind of you can see pieces of it in different systems now. That solution we actually got to brief to the National Academy of Engineering, which was a great honor. We got compliments on what we did in terms of developing that. What we focused on were, how do you take automation and couple it to the physics of the systems that the automation is trying to manage? And we really took a hard look at that, looked at the types of mechanisms you would have to have, and eventually that led one of the participants, Stephen Johnson, and I to do some work on what we call vehicle management systems, and develop kind of how that all integrates together with sensors and diagnostics and prognostics, and looking at management functions, automation management functions for the spacecraft and the whole thing. And it really is a great system study, because automation that is disconnected from how the system actually works doesn't really control the system very well.
Yeah.
And so you have to link those algorithms very carefully with the physical responses of the system that it's trying to control. And so that was a really fascinating thing, a learning experience for me. So I really enjoyed that. And you can see that system now. We took that concept, that I founded the branch at Marshall, but we took that system and said, well, how would that work for a launch vehicle that's human rated, that has astronauts flying on it? And we said, well, we don't need all the autonomy. We need to be able to do this in a way that meets the current technology levels with the needs of the spacecraft and the astronauts. And so we developed a whole concept and an approach on how to take health management techniques and bring those into the spacecraft to trigger an abort when it's necessary, but also not to trigger an abort when you don't need to. So those are called false positives. You don't want false positives on an abort system. And so making sure that we could do that reliably. And the SLS system is based on that concept now. So it kind of flowed through, and you can see how to do that. It's not the same level of automation that you would have going to Mars, where you have 6 people trying to operate a vehicle that's got the same complexity of an atomic submarine, but it's a good application.
And I do want to pivot just a tiny bit, and I just want to find out what you specifically say is a definition of systems engineering, or what you would kind of consider the definitions of systems engineering to be.
Well, that's a great question. In fact, I was working on a presentation I'm going to give in a couple of weeks, and I actually have there's a couple of definitions out there. But if you ask me what is systems engineering, what the INCOSE handbook says is systems engineering is a transdisciplinary and integrative approach to enable the successful realization, use, and retirement of engineered systems using system principles and concepts and scientific, technological, and management methods. When I was leading the NASA Systems Engineering Research Consortium, we came up with a definition that is perhaps a little bit more concise, but systems engineering is the engineering discipline which integrates the system functions, system environment, and the engineering disciplines necessary to produce and or operate an elegant system. In that definition, what you see is the importance for systems engineers to look at how the system integrates, how it interacts with each other, how the pumps interact with the tanks or the feed lines or with the crew environment, with the structural components. What do those interactions look like? Stephen Johnson, a colleague of mine, used to say that the interactions are what the systems engineers own. The other engineering disciplines own the other pieces. And what we're worried about is how it integrates together, how it fits together. And I kind of like that concept of focusing on the interactions and the interrelationships. The other part that you'll see in the definition that the NASA Systems Engineering Research Consortium came up with is integrating the engineering disciplines. So there's a big social construct in systems engineering. And so we are interested in how does information flow through the organization? What does that look like? Where are there gaps? If you've worked in a large organization, sometimes there's groups that don't work that well together. Well, that can create gaps in information flow about the system. And part of systems engineering is making sure that we recognize those gaps and we work to correct them, to get the information flow going in some way, shape, or form. It's not to say that we manage the people, but we want to manage the information flow.
Okay,
and so that's a really important part of systems engineering for me. You see that in the INCOSE definition when it's talking about transdisciplinary and integrative approach.
What would you say is like one of the ways we use systems engineering just kind of on a daily basis that we don't really think about?
That's a great question. So you'll trade out what you think about something when you buy a car, for example, because you're looking at your uses, how you're going to use it. You're looking at the engine power. You're looking at the comfort of the vehicle itself. How easy is it to drive? What does that look like for you? Do you need four-wheel drive? Do you need two-wheel drive? There's a lot of things you consider, but when you're doing that, you're taking a systems perspective because you're not choosing your vehicle based on one thing. You're choosing it based on a whole bunch of different factors and how they all fit together into the form of that car. And that's what the systems engineer is focused on, is how do all these fit together to produce a vehicle that a large number of people can make use of, can enjoy and drive. And so that's always the challenge in systems engineering, is to bring all those aspects together.
So now we're kind of talking about describing systems engineering. And so you've described systems as physical, logical, and socially interactive. How is INCOSE strengthening its focus on sociotechnical systems, especially the human and organizational dimensions?
Well, we formed the Social Systems Working Group back in 2019. I helped sponsor that at the time, and thought that was really, really important to look at that. There's two important dimensions that systems engineers need to focus on the social technical side. One is what we've already talked about, the information flow within the development organizations or the operational organization, the maintenance organization, depending on where you're at in the life cycle. But how does that information flow through that organization? That's a social aspect that gets affected by the social structure of the organization. Every organization has a different social structure, different culture within it. Just as geographical regions have different cultures, different social structures within them. And so you have to be aware of that, not expect everybody to be the same, expect differences, and differences aren't bad. And how do you work that? The other part, and what most people mean when they say social technical systems, they're talking about how the system's used by people, by the users, by the operators. How does a bus get used by the population? How is it effective? What services does it need to provide? What does that look like? So people are looking at that. If you have an ATM, how easy is it to use? How well can they integrate with that system, interact with that system? And so that's usually what people are talking about with social technical, that aspect. But you really need both, and you need to look at both.
Some state current modeling approaches like SysML and MBSE don't fully capture sociotechnical complexity. How do you see modeling evolving to better represent the organizational and human sides of system?
Yeah, MBSE is sometimes used as a synonym for SysML, but the system modeling language is just that. It's a language, and then you can buy a number of different tools that implement that. And it's a good language, and it's a good tool, and I think version 2 of SysML will greatly expand its impact and usefulness to systems engineers. The thing to keep in mind with SysML is it's a relational model. It models relationships, does that really well, how things are connected together. It shows you that. Architecture, it does extremely well. Behaviors, that type of thing, it captures. And so it gives you a good understanding of the relationships of the system itself, not only within the system between its subsystems, but also you can model external actors and environments with that as well. So it's a good tool in that sense. But that's not all you need. For system modeling, to really understand a system, you actually need a suite of systems engineering models. Your tool bag is not a model, your tool bag is a set of models, which you see in other engineering disciplines as well. But for systems engineers, we need to pay attention to the physics of the system. If we're building a physical system, your system will be defined by the physics and how it operates, and so you need to pay attention to that. If you're building a logical system, like a cyber system, then you need to pay attention to the logic, and I'm using that as a mathematical logic construct to understand how it works, how it's fit together, what the responses are with that. So you need that physics or logic basic understanding. You need to understand a concept called system state variables. And it goes back to the idea that systems engineers own the interactions. Well, within a system, there can be, depending on the size of the system, there could be 10 or 20,000 state variables in a given system. The systems engineers own the system state variables, which are the state variables that cover the interactions, cover the functions and the behaviors of the system quite well. And what you'll find is the other state variables tend to tree into those or feed into those in some mechanism. And so that's a really important modeling tool. There's a couple of different approaches that address that. One's called the goal function tree, which you can actually do in SysML. My understanding is SysML v2 has some capabilities that now support goal function tree development within that modeling type, so that's really good. The other is state analysis models, which take the software algorithms, not the code, but the algorithms, and run those with hardware state machine models against a system's operational timeline, whether that's a flight timeline or a mission timeline or a user's timeline, driving your car to the store and back, what does that look like? And so it really allows you to check on the algorithms and see how they relate to the hardware before you ever have to do real-time software testing. So it really accelerates that understanding. And a good example of that is if you're studying the flight software for a rocket, you sometimes have to do that in what's called real-time, meaning for every second that I operate, it's the second of flight for the rocket. I'm not going faster than time, which computers can do really easily. That takes 10 minutes plus setup and tear down of the simulation. Now you're running 25 minutes. When you run a state analysis model, you can check those same algorithms and those same simulated flight conditions in a tenth of a second, thousandth of a second. They get really, really fast.
Yeah, wow.
You can run 1,000 in a minute or more, depending on the level of complexity that you have. And so they allow you to do a lot of checks on the algorithms, which then allows you to tailor your real-time testing to just the things to make sure the software interacts properly with the hardware and to make sure that you're covering things that the state analysis model says are questions that you want to make sure you confirm that, yeah, that really is working right, or that really does cause that error condition or hazard condition that we don't want. And so you can correct that. But it really allows you to focus the software testing, which speeds it up. So that's a toolkit that we need in our systems model tool bag. Another emerging model type is called system value model, which just gets into how do you know that the system that you're building is meeting the preferences of the customers? How do you know that you're fulfilling what whoever contracted you to do, whoever the users are out in the community? How do you know that you're fulfilling the preferences that they want? And that's what system value modeling is about, and about trying to get to that. It's a very interesting concept. It's based a little bit on economics from that standpoint, a little bit on utility functions, and really gives you a nice way to compare your development preferences for your organization with the customer's preferences, because they generally aren't the same.
Yeah.
And if you let a development organization go without guidance from the customer's preferences, you can get different choices and create conflicts. It's a way to measure that and make sure you're following through on that. So that's another modeling type. Statistical modeling is important in systems engineering. That's been done for decades and needs to continue. And then the other modeling type, which gets to the social technical question, is system dynamics. And system dynamics came out of MIT in the late 60s. Jay Forster did that. It's its own unique modeling type, but it's great for social interactions. And some of its early successes were in social systems modeling, trying to study the effects of social impacts that were having results that people didn't understand. And why was that? And system dynamics was able to prove that out or show the results of that. So it gave you a really good understanding of that social technical system. And so when we talk about system modeling, it's not one modeling type, it's really 6, and we need to have all those in our tool belt and applying those as we go through. I will say that a lot of these modeling types, some of them we used to use and we've gotten away from it. Physics-based modeling, that was systems engineering in the 70s. And then we moved away from that a little bit with working on the processes, which was a very important step in the development of systems engineering. But now we need to kind of bring those back together, kind of merge them back together, meld them together. And so you need not only the processes, you not only need the relational models, but you need the physics-based models. And the state variable models are a form of that, and so on down the line. So we need to expand our horizons to really get to the next level of complex systems that the world is asking for, and artificial intelligence is taking us to, whether we want to or not. It's here. And so we need to be able to handle that higher level of complexity.
We have so many terminologies that we use, and it's still challenging across the field. How is INCOSE helping the profession move towards a more shared vocabulary across all of systems engineering?
That's great. So, I did my talk at the IW where I talked a little bit about the history of systems engineering, comparing to the history of other engineering disciplines and how engineering disciplines developed. That's the work I did while I was at NASA. The interesting thing is all engineering disciplines start in practice. They go through developing a set of maybe heuristics, if you want to call them that, and then they start developing processes about here's how to build this bridge, this arched bridge support, and you do it the same way every time, so here's the process on how to do that. And so they started documenting that. A good example of that's the Vitruvius's 10 books on architecture, which was written about the Roman Empire practices for building a lot of mechanical engineering stuff, water pumps and things, and around 25 BC. And so he covered the practices developed over the previous 300 years or so if you read his introduction. So that's kind of interesting, but they all developed that way. And that's where systems engineering is. And so INCOSE has helped systems engineering move forward much faster by putting together the systems engineering processes in a way that they're complete, they're comprehensive, they cover what needs to be done, how the practice is done, and from there we're ready to step into the next phase, which for every engineering discipline is the definition of the laws of science that govern the discipline. And so systems engineering is looking at that step now. There's been some good work done on it. We developed some postulates and principles as part of the NASA Systems Engineering Research Consortium. DeWeck has done some work at MIT on laws of systems engineering. There's been some work done on the mathematical basis of systems engineering and category theory, which I think has been looked at various times over the last 4 or 5 decades since it was developed in the 40s. But we think we've got the right view on it now, the right perspective on how to apply it, that it looks like it might actually provide that basis, mathematical basis for systems engineering. And so once we have those pieces together, systems engineering will be able to step into the next level of complex systems. We'll be able to do things that are much more tightly integrated with very subtle interactions, intricate connections, and be able to properly design those and deal for the non-deterministic behavior of a lot of those systems, which AI in and of itself brings in. So that's really kind of the next step. And so INCOSE, by providing the processes in the handbook, has prepared the discipline to go into the next step of science basis, and that work is starting. And so that's a really good progress, and INCOSE is supporting that work with our academic council and looking at things and how we develop that. Our system sciences working group is doing a great job of pulling together some of these fundamental science aspects of systems engineering and really starting to try to work through the definition of that, coordinate that. Again, in COSE, we are set up to facilitate and coordinate, not necessarily to do the research, but what we want to do is bring together the researchers so that they have a community and they can share their ideas, their thoughts, their work, their progress. And that helps to move the discipline forward.
Yeah.
And so that's how INCOSE is involved.
And so let's talk a little bit about INCOSE's future. And with INCOSE, we often talk about becoming the world's trusted authority in systems engineering. What milestones or types of achievements would signal that INCOSE has truly reached that point?
Well, that's a great question. That's a hard one to answer, by the way, because that depends a little bit on the systems engineering community itself. Right? And so how do you measure how well people trust something? If you look at how well people trust a product, do you look at how many products are bought, right? The consumer response to it. And so that is certainly a measure of that. But I think there's certain things, though, that we can strive to do that we are looking at really hard. We want to have a world-class systems engineering technical publication, or publications, I should say, more than one. And so looking at how we do that, how do we do our technical publications? How can we get world-class in terms of recognition, which supports our research community and our academic community rather strongly, but it also supports our practice community because it gives them a good source of new ideas to go bring into their workplaces and advance what they are doing, make their products better, make their costs go down, make their schedule go faster. There's a lot out there that can do that. And so we're working on facilitating that kind of work.
You also chaired the Systems Engineering Principal Action Team that updated INCOSE's principle in 2022. What motivated these updates, and which principles do you think will have the greatest impacts?
Well, let me give you a little bit of history. The
Yes,
principles
please.
actually started in about 2011 in a conversation that I had with Mike Griffin, former NASA administrator and former director of research and engineering as Undersecretary of Defense, which would now be the Undersecretary of War. We were talking about trying to find the engineering basis for systems engineering, and Mike said, you know, what I'm really looking for is what Boltzmann did with the gas laws. And I said, okay, explain a little bit more. He said, Boltzmann postulated a theory of what's going on, which became, once it was proved, the gas laws. And so he said, where we're at in systems engineering is I'm looking for the postulates. What are the postulates? And so the research consortium, the NASA Systems Engineering Research Consortium, picked up some universities and kind of shared that out. There were 17 universities involved, not all at one time, in that research consortium. And so we kind of went out and said, okay, what are the postulates? And we sat in a conference room one day. Paul Colopy was part of that. Phil Farrington and a couple others were there, and we were working on, okay, what are the postulates? What do we think they are? And we came up with a list of 7. And looking at the research that we had done and the experiences that we had and what we thought were important and what it might be that would lead to the engineering basis. And so we put those out. We asked for comments. We started kind of expanding on it. So that became a set of principles under the postulates. And then there were some questions that we had that we couldn't answer but thought we should be able to prove, and those became hypothesis, of which there were 3 of those. So when we got that to where we had done what we could with that small group of universities in the research consortium, I realized I've got this put together, but it needs broader review. It needs to get out where more people can see it. And so I turned to INCOSE and said, hey, how about taking a look at what we've put together at NASA and see if that would be of benefit to the broader community. Do you agree with this or not? And so we formed a small team within INCOSE, and I led that team to kind of relook at it. Now, this was not a rubber stamp on what NASA did, because I got to tell you, that was a really good team, and they really challenged a lot of aspects. And what came out of that process was what was published in the INCOSE Systems Engineering Principles document. And what we decided to do there, the principles and the postulates were overlapping in the way they were constructed in the NASA version. And so we decided to use the term principles at this point and make them all principles and collapse it a little bit. And so we did that. So that's why you'll see, if you look at the NASA technical publication, Engineering Elegant Systems, Theory of Systems Engineering, and you compare that to the INCOSE Systems Engineering Principles publication, you'll see a lot of similarities, but you'll see a more compressed set. Not that we lost any content, we just shrunk it back down, which I actually thought was a good step. And so that's what's out in the principles document now. Since then, we have been able to prove one hypothesis mathematically and put that into a principle. We've also, I think, Ollie DeWeck's work is related to hypothesis 2. So I believe he and I are discussing how we might take his work and use that as the proof there and bring that back into perhaps the first law of systems engineering from an INCOSE perspective. And so we're seeing progress in the research side of systems engineering and the definition and understanding of what constitutes good systems engineering and how that discipline, what's the foundation of the discipline from a mathematical, physical science, systems theory perspective.
As we kind of begin to wrap up, I'll maybe hit you with just one more easy question here. What excites you the most about the future of INCOSE during your presidency?
Just the progress and the excitement about moving the discipline forward, right? Getting things out for people in practice so that they can practice the discipline of systems engineering more efficiently, more effectively, to learn what they need to learn so that they can advance their own skills and in their own careers. So that's an exciting time. The research aspects that we've talked about, the sociological aspects, which is another basis of systems engineering, getting those more well-defined, clearly out there, so that, again, we can give instructions back to our practitioners, how they need to apply the systems engineering processes, how they need to approach systems engineering for the systems that they're working on, and give them guidance to allow them to solve the problems that are difficult to solve today, to be able to cover the next big challenge.
Very nice. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really inspiring conversation. I love all of your talks about NASA. It's really fascinating to talk to you every single time. And we're really grateful for all of your insight and just the opportunity to talk with you. And we're excited for what you are going to bring as the president of INCOSE.
Sure. It's an exciting time. It's an exciting time for me personally. It's an exciting time for the discipline. And I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the INCOSE Podcast. We appreciate you spending your time with us today. If you enjoyed what you heard and want to learn more about the largest global systems community, check us out at incose.org.